Hey, good morning, everybody. Um, Unfortunately, the Money Talks studio band was not able to get here to do the opening music. Their van broke down on 94, but maybe next Money Talks will actually have the super cool studio band do our introductory music. So welcome back. It is Friday, October 11th, and we are heading into the weekend. I am Mike Berry, Executive Director for WASBO, and we're excited to do this special edition of Money Talks. I know that we think they're all special, but this is an even more special edition of Money Talks. This one's going to be different. This is going to be a good one for a change. This time we actually mean it, so hang in there with us. Um, Let me introduce the Mighty WASBO Money Talks team here. Here are your colleagues. Brian Adesso is the Director of Business Services for Menasha, and Brian is the WASBO Treasurer Emeritus. He usually just says WASBO Treasurer, but it's actually WASBO Treasurer. We also have Andy Weiland, the current treasurer for WASBO. Andy is the director of business services at Oregon. And our special guest today is Pete the Predictor, Predictor Pete Grinder. Pete is the director of finance for Verona School District, and he's one of the best number crunchers in all of WASBO. He is the seer of seers, the prognosticator of prognosticators. Pete's going to share some of his data with us this morning. How you guys doing?
How are you? And no pressure, Pete.
Yeah, no, none at all. I don't feel any
It's
pressure from that intro at all.
well, Pete. I mean, come on. In Pennsylvania, they have a like a groundhog that does the predicting, and we're at least one. You're at least one step above that, and we're proud to have you. So our session today, so there's the team. Our agenda is in the upper left there. Just a few mark your calendar type dates for the next few weeks. And then we're going to revisit the school levy tax credit, both from sort of a policy perspective and what it actually means on property tax bills. We're going to talk about the general aid estimate on the pre-populated revenue limit worksheet. Voucher payments and how those affect your tax levy adoption, and then the actual tax levy adoption itself. So what do you guys think? You ready to dive in?
You bet.
Okay. The chat is open for this webinar. So please, compliments only on the chat line. And and let's see what else. We are recording this. If anybody misses it, you can pick it up later. There are three files, excuse me, that are referenced in the presentation today. All three are from Pete. The first one is school levy tax credits by school district. The second is school levy tax credits, I think, by district and municipality.
Yep.
And then the third is the estimated equalization aid. Ooh, sneak preview time. Estimated equalization aid that is not scheduled to show up until next week, Tuesday. So those three files can be found on wasbo.com Money Talks. You might have to do a little navigating there to get to the right episode, but they're all out there and they are for you to use. But one disclaimer, important disclaimer, these estimates that we're using are based on the best information that was available. And it's just a sincere good faith effort by Pete to generate this information. He's been uncannily accurate, but ultimately it's on you. You got to use the DPI data, the official data on levy credits. But this should give you a pretty good sense of where you're heading, right? And give you a jump on this information. So again, thank you to Pete. Okay. So let's dive in, right? What do you think? Okay, so we're going to start slow. Let's just do some key dates, right? I'll take this one. Next Tuesday is October 15th. That's the date that the equalization aid pops up on your pre-populated revenue limit worksheet. So we had an opportunity to talk to the director of school financial services, Jennifer Burrows, yesterday, and she tells us 11 o'clock on Tuesday, the 15th. I used to have a board member in Madison who was, I'm going to be polite and say, just wildly over-involved. And he was hitting refresh on that aid thing about 6 a.m. In his pajamas, and then would, call me immediately. So it's good to know that 11 o'clock seems to be the target timeline. So, okay, and then you've got a couple weeks to get your work done. The board has to adopt a levy by November 1st, which is a Friday. They probably won't appreciate it if you schedule a meeting on the night of the 31st. So factor that in, because everyone's got trick-or-treating and other things they've got to do. November 5th is the election day. We mentioned that only because there are so many districts that have referenda on that election. So because of that, working backwards, a lot of you will be passing two levies on the November 1st vote, or the vote that has to happen before November 1st. You pass the if we win and if we lose versions of your levy. Just make sure you explain that to your board ahead of time. And then lastly, the date to certify to the municipalities is technically the 10th. But as Andy pointed out a few days ago, the 10th is a Sunday. Now, I suppose statutorily that extends you to the 11th, but why bother taking that chance? So we're moving it up here to the 8th. So get that done by Friday the 8th, and don't create any opportunity for controversy. Right? They leave anything out of there?
Think
No,
you got
we're
it all.
good? Okay. Okay. So those are your key dates. I think we can move on. Okay. School levy tax credits. I'll do the introduction. I'm going to turn it over to Pete and also to Andy and Brian, because they both presented this last year at the school board level and know what it's all about, as do many of you. But let's start here. After we did the levies last year in November, the Wisconsin Policy Forum published a paper. It was in December. I think it was called like Focus Report number 23. And I thought these were two good quotes. I'm not going to read the first one to you. It was just summarizing our collective school levies. It's the second paragraph that I thought was a good kickoff for this discussion. Here they were advising the taxpayers that the actual increase in net tax bills going to taxpayers will be, or at this point was, much less, however, because the state budget increased the two state levy credits. We just call them the school levy credit, that lowered the net amount for homeowners. So it was a big deal last year, and it will be not as big a deal this year, but still very much worth noting. So let's dive into the levy credits. From a policy perspective, I don't know if there's anything else that highlights the sort of contradictory nature of how we deal with tax policy in the state around schools. Sort of the conflicting legislation that we deal with. Here you have, and what I'm referring to here is the disparity between equalization aid and school levy tax credits. The equalization aid is, of course, the root word is equal, to equalize, right? So most of the money is going to the communities that don't have property wealth. And now completely conversely, in the same budget at the same time, we have levy credits that do the opposite. They send the money back to the communities that have the highest values and are paying the highest property taxes. So, right? I guess this just depends on, who's in charge in any given budget season, whether it's the Dems or the GOP or whatever. So last in the 23-25 budget, they poured a lot of money into school levy tax credits, money that really, in an earlier time in this state, would have simply gone into equalization aid. But the effect of this is that last year there was a big jump. So this is last November, 255 million. And now for this year, 24-25, first you have to repeat that 225 just to sustain it. So you don't start backsliding. And then there's a new 80 million. So you will see about about a third? Yeah, about a third of as much of a benefit via the levy credits this fall as compared to last fall. Does that make, how did I do on that? Making sense? All right. All right. So Brian, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and you and Pete will walk through a few slides. This is yours. This is a Menasha slide, right?
So we used this last year during our budget hearing, just to explain it to our board on what the school levy tax credit was, how it shows up on your tax bill. Because when we pass our levy, I mean, it's not a direct translation into what's actually on the bill, and it hasn't been like that like forever. We give our amount to the municipality, they put it through their calculator, and then the school levy tax credit comes off of it. So this is just highlighting where that amount shows up on the bill, and then what the net tax is.
Okay. All right. So let's take a closer look. So I learned a lot last fall. I learned how hard it is to find school levy tax credits by school district information when we needed it. It just was incredibly hard to find. And that's why it was so important that Pete and Andy were on this time last year. Showing, and I think Steve Summers and others were involved in this. Eric Cass was involved, creating this sneak preview of the levy credits by school district. So, Pete, what do we have here?
Okay, Mike. Yeah, what we're seeing here is actually just a little screenshot of one of the files that you will find out on wasbo.com/money talks, where it's going to list all of the districts in Wisconsin and what we think the school levy credit was last year compared to what we think it's going to be this year. We can also track, obviously, we'd be able to track the estimated changes on there so you could see how your district is going to be affected. And finally, that very last column on the right, we put one in here to say about 85% of the change, because like I said, this is an estimate out there, but it's an estimate with the best data that we can find out there. So if you are reporting, like suppose you are in Abbotsford School District up there, you can see their estimated change is about $45,000 or almost $46,000. But maybe they're a little bit more comfortable with the message to say that, we're maybe closer to $40,000 just to build yourself in a little bit of buffer on that.
Yeah. The best thing about working in Abbotsford is you don't have to scroll through all the data all the time. So this is just a screenshot of the top of Pete's worksheet. The full worksheet is posted on the WASBO website, as you can see. So because there's $80 million more going into the levy credits, I'm assuming the estimated change column is generally positive all the way across the board, Pete. Is that true? Almost all the way.
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time?
Is the estimated change column, I'm assuming it's overwhelmingly positive for most districts.
Yeah, it'll typically be positive. There are some districts that actually have a negative change, even though $80 million more is thrown into the pot this year than the prior year. But the districts that have a negative amount in that estimated change column are ones that typically have a larger levy about 4 years ago than they have last year. So the levy credit is calculated based off of the last 3 years of your levy and how you've levied compared to the rest of the state, actually. So if you were actually levying more 4 years ago than you did last year, you may end up seeing a negative column or I'm sorry, a negative amount in that estimated change column.
Okay, so this is your estimate. And I think the next couple slides show some different ways that you might be able to use this information. So here we just discussed this, and then we're going to show you an example from Menasha. We did this last year because different boards have different comfort levels. So here are three different ways to approach the levy credit. The first is to say, look, this is beyond the school board's immediate control, and therefore we're not going to say anything about it at all at the board meeting. It's more of a municipal thing, so we're not going to even mention it. And that was pretty much the case, wasn't it, in most school districts for years and years until last year. And I think last year, two things combined to make this really important. One was a lot of districts were benefiting from the increase in the low revenue ceiling, but they were going to have to tax, to use that new authority. And the second thing was that there was so much more money in the levy credits that it was like we weren't telling the full story. There was a piece missing, which was that the net taxes were going to be a lot lower than the sort of the taxes you would infer from the school district tax levy action. So option A was kind of the way it always was until last year. And last year we had a lot of districts do either B or C. One was that they just did their usual presentation of the tax levy and then said, by the way, it's important that you know that there's these things called levy credits, so it won't be as bad as it looks. Okay. And then option C was where it was important enough to literally put it on the screen and show the board what was going on. So this is really a local choice based on what you, your superintendent, and your board feel is appropriate for your community. This is a screenshot from Menasha, right, Brian? So what was really interesting about this is where it starts. It starts with a total levy increase of Menasha, right?
Yep. So we factored in the increase on the top. So on the top is all the levy stuff that you would see on the revenue limit sheet. So we added it all up, something that the board sees clearly. And then in the box below, it's what the board doesn't see. So it's what our school levy tax credit was, what it was increasing to, and then that net levy that you see on your property tax bill. So it shows that we could go up with our overall levy, which we did. And then Menasha talks a lot about mill rate. I know that some say don't talk about it, some say do, but we still talk about mill rate. So our mill rate was overall going down. But Pete, I wanted to highlight too, because there's some comments on here. If we would have paid off all of our debt this last year, and that levy would have went down, the school levy tax credit would be less.
That's true. If your tax levy is less now in this last year than it was 4 years ago, because like we said before, it is a rolling 3-year average, just like your third Friday count to try to get your FTE on the revenue limit worksheet. It just depends on how you look compared to where you were in the past or a few years back.
It's essentially a kind of a form of a refund almost, right? In its logic. So yeah, if you're paying less in, you're going to be eligible for less in the way of credit. So I thought Menasha was really interesting last year because if you had stopped at total levy, which is where we traditionally would have stopped in our presentation, you'd have been saying to the board, we're looking at a levy increase of just under $1 million. And that's an increase of about 3.86%. By extending the story and going into that material below and saying, but there's a levy credit change as well, the story actually flips, right? It becomes the net levy is actually down year over year. So it was a very different story. And again, I thought that was important for those districts that were nervous about levying to use their newfound authority under the low revenue ceiling. So it was a
And
big deal last year. In
yeah,
fact,
and Andy, could you talk a little bit about, I mean, it's good to look at it globally like this, but there's other factors that people may want to consider.
Yeah, that's why we provided it by the municipality, because what's going on in your individual municipalities can really change the impact of what people experience from a tax perspective. So looking at not only the levy credit and how that's distributed, what's interesting in the levy credit is, say you have three districts in one municipality, the levy credit is actually a part of a rate that is determined by the three districts' average 3 years of levy. So it actually depends how they experience that based on what you and your other two neighbors are doing in kind of a blended way. It gets a little complicated, but the amount of money that we're giving you in the total for the school district in that file, it takes into account all of that. If you want to actually see what's going on in the municipality, then you can open that file and actually see what's happening there.
I mean, it really depends on how your community is and how your board is on, if you want to go down to the detailed level, if your board's all right with seeing it like this and saying that overall decreased, just knowing that some municipalities may have a large increase.
And I think when I talked about this on Friday at the fall conference, I think the value in that is, if you're going to get phone calls, you're going to maybe know where those phone calls are coming from ahead of time, and who's probably not going to be calling you.
right. I think maybe half the time that I did these, it was a special meeting, as opposed to a regular board meeting. And what I was used to was a board that was a little grumpy about being there. They were impatient. They just wanted the bottom line. How much is the levy going up? And they wanted to vote and get out of there. But there are other boards that may really want to dig in. So that's just the way it goes. Yeah.
The rabbit hole that you go down is when the question is like, what does this do to my taxes?
Oh gosh. Yeah. All you can say is it has a broad-based, generally positive effect, right? But
Yeah.
beyond that, you can't guarantee anything, right? At the individual homeowner level. Okay. Um, anything else on levy credits? We invite you to go to the file and thanks again, Pete.
I'll add one more
Okay.
thing on here, Mike. There are the two
Yeah.
files that you can see out on Money Talks right now that have to do with the school levy credit. And the one by municipality that Andy was mentioning is a very long file. So I know a lot of times people typically open a file and they just want to hit the print button, but just so you know, there's like 70 some odd pages out there. So like many of us in the business office, we always tell people not to print if they don't need to, and you probably don't need 70 pages running through your printer right here. So just to forewarn everyone, it's a pretty large file.
We have to
Thank
add
you for-
we have to add sustainability to Pete's badge there now.
That's
Yeah.
right. You get the green badge.
No, those printing rules apply to us also.
I could
You got to
almost
set
hear
the example.
Yes.
I could almost hear the timber falling with everybody printing those out. Okay. Great stuff on levy credits. So again, it's relevant again this year at about 1/3 the level of impact that we saw last year. For what it's worth, my opinion, that money should have gone into the equalization aid formula, and we should have kept it simple, but I understand everyone's situated differently. Okay, let's talk equalization aid. So October 15th is Tuesday morning, 11 a.m. The updated pre-populated revenue limit sheets come out, right? It's just an aside here. It's not just the equalization aid that everyone's waiting on, right? It seems to me that for most business managers, it's the left side of the revenue limit formula, the enrollment counts, and then of course the open enrollment impacts are probably as volatile as anything, right?
Mike, those are out. DPI released a revenue limit yesterday. So it did update it with the pupil counts and property
Oh.
valuations and transfer services on there. So a lot of the stuff's kind of filled in now. I
Good.
will mention that there's one piece that's missing that is an error for the personal property tax exemption. DPI forgot to put that on the sheet. It's not going to be 0. It's going to be what your letter said, the one that doesn't say Act 12. It's going to be the other letter in there. So DPI will be fixing that. So it shows your computer aid in there, and then it'll show the personal property too.
Oh boy, if there's one year we didn't want to mess that one up. Right, and we got enough confusion around that. So that's like 12C, 12D on the revenue limit worksheet, I think. So it's showing zeros, but it won't whenever the next fix happens, which I assume will be pretty soon. So, the other thing is that the revenue limit worksheet gets updated many, many, many times, right? So don't sleep on that. It gets updated even after the 15th, 16th, 17th. So you got to stay on it.
Yeah.
Check it
They will
multiple
update it
times.
every day when everyone's submitting their tax levies.
Yeah. So stay on it and check it that one extra time before you actually, lock in your levy amounts. For your budgeting convenience, there is another file out on the Money Talks website, and that is a file that looks like this. Pete, you want to walk us through it?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. One of the things that I've been doing here in Verona and what I used to do at Forecast 5 when I was there is I always try to track where the aid formula is going to land. And basically what I do is, in a nutshell, I can take the July 1st aid estimate, which we all know that, there's some good data in there, but there's also a lot of data in there that's not necessarily telling the whole story of what the state is going to be, because that's mainly because of budgeted costs are used in the aid calculation as opposed to what we know is supposed to be the actual costs. So what I've been doing is I've been having some conversations with Matt Beyer at DPI, and he's been sending me the updated shared cost, which I can plug into my aid calculator that I have built. So I'm able to get an aid estimate out there with using that updated data and any other piece of data that I can find that's updated. Like, for example, there may have been some membership audits which changed your enrollment. So sometime this summer, the enrollment would have changed. And DPI also released, or actually the Department of Revenue released different property values because they had released some in early May, but then there's been a few adjustments on there. And I plug all of those into my aid calculator to give us an estimate of where I think the aid formula is going to land. Now, there are some things that I don't update from July 1st. Like the big one is being Fund 41, because we all know there's a Fund 40 line, amortization line on the shared cost calculation. And I've seen the guts of what DPI is, how they calculate it out. And I thought, you know what, that seems like a lot of work. So let's just push that one to the side. There are also, like on the second page of the aid calculation, there's a number of like inter-district students and intra-district students, which I'm not sure where that is on DPI, but I just use whatever the data that I can find from the July 1st aid estimate. So the bottom line is, if I don't know where updated data is, I just use the data that DPI has on the July 1st aid estimate. So one of the files that are in the WASBO website, WASBO/Money Talks, is my updated aid calculation, where it's going to list every district on there and what their October 15th of last year aid amount was. And then finally, the big column there that we see right in the center that says what I think the early aid estimate is going to be and what your change in aid will be from October 15th of last year to this year. So yeah, that's that about covers all of it, I think. There's a number of districts out there. Well, one of the things I wanted to point out, and I haven't even mentioned this to the rest of the panelists yet, is how much the amount of shared cost is going up this year. Because typically shared cost goes up about 1 or 2% per year, and then our inflation got a little higher and it got up to 3% one year, and it was a little over 3% last year. Now, the shared cost that's going into the aid formula this year is over 6%. So the statewide, we went from like 10.2 billion to 10.9 billion dollars out there. So it's a pretty hefty increase in shared costs, which of course is going to be having a lot to do with the inflation rate out there. But one of the things that Mike had said right when we started this webinar is that this is an estimate. So DPI is releasing the actual numbers coming out on October 15th. So the data that you're getting here is only just to give you a general idea of where you think the aid formula could land. So I wouldn't take these numbers and start sending it to the press or anything like that, because we still have to wait for October 15th. So anyway, this data is available out there for you to download. So feel free to take a peek at it. And I think this one's only about 10 or 12 pages long. So, so hopefully you won't have any more trees having to be cut down if you ended up printing off this entire one.
I'm really intrigued by so that's the shared cost is a reflection of last year's actuals, right? So
Yes.
I imagine it would be maybe a combination of the low revenue ceiling moving up for 150-ish districts, the $325 per pupil increase in their revenue limit gave the districts the capacity to even do that. I'm trying to think maybe some more debt service from successful referenda. It has to be a combination of those things, I would think.
Overrides.
Yeah, the levy overrides, exactly.
Well, and
So,
you look at the flip side of this too, and districts using their ESSER money, because ESSER money doesn't flow into the shared cost. So it's, if ESSER money didn't exist, maybe this would actually be a higher or a greater increase.
yeah, good point.
Who knows? There's a lot of unknowns out there. So
okay, so if you want to look up again, Abbotsford, you're welcome. You don't have to look up anything. We have it right here for you. And that goes for their all six of you. The file is out there. So unlike the levy credits, here you're going to see lots of changes, ups, downs, with a much wider range, I assume, of effectual experience. It's just the nature of equalization aids. So, okay, so this next slide is just kind of talking points. And we have, in our profession, we always have a lot of folks who are brand new. This is the first or second time they've worked through in October in the business office, and you've got a lot of savvy veterans. So for the savvy veterans, this stuff is second nature. But we're here to try to, how do I put it? For the savvy veterans, hearing this is certainly does no harm. And for the new folks, it's absolutely essential. So give us a minute to just kind of cover some really basic concepts. And these are good to explain to your superintendent, district administrator, and maybe even your board when you get there. So of course, at the most fundamental level, there's this inverse relationship between equalization aid and tax levy, all other things being equal. Every time I said inverse relationship in front of the school board, they'd stare at me. And then I would say, like a teeter-totter. And they'd go, oh, well, now we get it. So, or a seesaw, depending on where you live, different terms for that. But just making sure they understand that. And the second one is even more important, the second point. And you all know this by now, right? More equalization aid does not mean more spendable revenue. It drives down your levy. And the opposite is also true. Less equalization aid doesn't necessarily mean less spendable revenue, but it does put more pressure on your tax levy. So it's so often the October 15th aid estimates will come out. DPI will do a press release. Someone will see that your school district is receiving a couple $1 million more of equalization aid. And then they'll say, this is a perfect time for me to either propose a new program, add staff, or argue for higher salaries or whatever, and treat it like it's spendable revenue. So it's a communications challenge. Heck, even the governor's office has done this at one time or another. said, we've got this big increase in equalization aid, historic new funding for schools. And it is and it isn't, right, from a spendable standpoint. And then lastly, if you're really looking for extra credit bonus points, be ready to comment on why your equalization aid increased or decreased, and that's a toughie. You got to really be able to know your stuff to get into that. In most cases, as I said, in my experience, the board didn't really want to unpack why the equalization aid was moving the way it was beyond maybe the simplest explanations. But if you know it, or if you want to dive in, we certainly encourage you to do so. How do you guys treat this with your board? Do you unpack it, or you just kind of breeze through it? Curious to know, Andy, Brian.
I definitely breezed through it. Yeah.
Full hour explanation of exactly why there's a hurricane. I just want to know where it's going to hit and when it's going to hit. I think board members, have the same mindset when it comes to the levy.
No, but it's great seeing tree palms fly into Anderson Cooper's face, and that's good stuff.
I'm always suspecting it's a bunch of barn fans that are just off camera. They're aimed right at him. Somebody throwing leaves into the breeze. So, okay, let's move on and talk about when you're actually adopting the levy. Again, this is a product of last year's 23-25 state budget, where the payments per pupil in the voucher program, the special needs vouchers, independent charters were big winners in the state budget, and very significant increases on a per pupil basis. So that can have a real effect on driving up your tax levy, right? So let's dive in. Brian in Menasha has a lot of activity in this area. I was surprised at how much of your levy is aimed at vouchers. Let's take a look at Brian's stuff. So this is a little helper for you if you have voucher costs that are driving up your levy and you're kind of getting quote unquote blamed for it. Well, here's how Menasha approached it. Okay, Brian, you want to take over?
So we do a little 2-page infographic with just some of the hot items on it. This is the first page of it. And then right up in the top, we talk about the revenue limit because it's one of the most important things. The other important thing is our demographics of our students and our key stats. But under the revenue limit, we do highlight the private vouchers, the $1.7 million. Then down below, we highlighted even more on what it is for the mill rate and what the increase is. So it was a 39% increase. This was last year's. I haven't done this year's yet.
Right.
And obviously we don't have this year's, but I would anticipate that would be being released right around the 15th also on the revenue limit. I feel like that's right when they release it. And then the total tax levy increase. So my board really likes to see this and have that impact. All one community members that comes to my budget hearing also get to see this, but we do post it on our website. And it actually came up when we were closing a building too, and we got a lot of traction around that time. And people kind of clicked from what's happening with these private vouchers and how it's impacting their tax bills. So take any opportunity you can to highlight it, even if it's not around budget time.
So you're taxing 1.7 or
Yeah.
1,763,000 in Menasha for payment that you're basically the pass-through, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot. Yeah, the box in the bottom that you've got in gray, that's kind of the key fact, right? Okay. And then you've got another one that's a pie chart, I think, here.
Yeah, so this one I use in my budget presentation that lasts all of 15 minutes because my board doesn't have the patience, but that's fine. So this is a breakout of it. So again, we talk a lot about mill rate, and I get that at some point I need to switch it, but all right, how the board understands it. So the pie chart kind of shows how much of the overall mill rate breakdown is in vouchers. So it's 8%. Which is a large piece. Obviously, the largest piece for us is our Fund 39 debt. We just passed a referendum, and we're levying a lot to pay off that debt. But we break it out of the Fund 10, so we lower the mill rate there so that so people really see what the vouchers are costing. We try not to hide it within our Fund 10 levy.
Okay, and it's your board expects that from you, and they welcome that.
Yep.
Okay. I think this is really clear. I think both sides put together do a really nice job of communicating what's going on. Okay. I guess it depends on where you are in the state, whether vouchers are a really big deal, sort of a big deal, or in some cases there's no competing school, there's no private school in the area, so you tend not to have a lot of voucher activity. But clearly, Menasha at 8% of your levy, wow.
And we're not on a cap either, so
Okay.
more can come.
Yeah. Okay, and then finally, let's talk about the tax levy adoption itself. Obviously, we've covered this. You've got to act by Friday, November 1st. And I think we're just going to end here with just some really basic talking points about presenting the tax levy. The first is what Brian was just referring to, which was the equalized tax rate. We had some districts get themselves in hot water a couple years ago when equalized tax base itself started to increase double digits, 12, 13, 14% around the state. And school districts were in a position, many were in a position where their tax levy, holdout levy was going up, in many cases substantially. But the equalized tax base was going up much more than that. So how do I say this? The numerator was increasing, but the denominator was increasing a heck of a lot more. And so there were some school districts around the state who either they were silent and the newspaper just did it or whatever, where the story was, hey, great news, the equalized tax rate's going down. And that it almost invited taxpayers to assume that their personal property tax bill was going to go down too. And of course, it didn't turn out that way. The levy itself, the numerator, the change in the numerator is much more predictive of what you're going to have happen. So, in some cases, taxpayers concluded that they were being manipulated. Yeah, that the communication was intended to deceive. And I think that went too far. So the way to avoid that is just to be super clear about this. So if you do have the situation where your levy's going up, I'll use an example, like 5%, but your equalized tax base is going up 10%, yes, you will have a tax rate decrease. But you also have to make sure that you explain both sides of that and say, as a predictor, right, you're probably going to be closer to the 5% increase minus the real growth in your community, which typically means 3 or 4% net. So let's not, let's be careful. Let's guard against engaging any salesmanship around using equalized tax rate, because people are going to experience the reality of it, 6 weeks after you set the levy anyway, so you might as well just come right out with it. Right? We are in the business of being accurate. We are not in the business of persuading people about these things. So a couple other just common sense things. Prepare a really simple press release. If you're in a community where there's actually media coverage of local news, which is becoming less and less common, but having a simple press release prepared so you're not standing in the hallway after the meeting trying to explain the difference between levy, base, and rate to a first-year newspaper reporter who has to get their story in. You just don't want to be in that position. Just create the thing ahead of time and just hand it off. No last-minute surprises. Obviously, we want to get the board material posted. And if you want to make the meeting go well, encourage your board members to call ahead with their questions. That pertains to pretty much every issue. But this one in particular, be prepared, double check your work. I always, in the new administrator workshops, suggest that the business official or whoever is responsible for this work block some time on their calendars, the afternoon of the 15th, the 16th, the 17th, just, block out 3 hours of work time and just tell people to leave you alone because you've got to get this right. So reserve some time for yourself. And that gives you time to check in with your superintendent and kind of preview it, all that good stuff. And lastly, and this goes for the, when you're talking to the board about budget or levy, tying it back to your mission and your purpose is always a good way to end the meeting or end the presentation. So those are all really common sense, again, almost second nature to the folks who've done this 10 or 12 or more times. But if you're new, hopefully those points will give you a little better sense of how to approach it. Any final comments, overall comments as we head into the October 15th to November 1 window from our esteemed panel of WASBO experts?
I think it's really important to, try to get questions out of the board and try to pull questions out, even if you are a veteran. My budget hearing goes very quick, but I want to make sure that the board fully understands. So like this last meeting, we already prepped them, like these are questions that you should be asking during this because, if I'm not providing it, I should be providing those answers to you because if the community asks them, they should know. So, I mean, yes, they're approving it, but they should also understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a superintendent many, many years ago who used to really emphasize that. And he would say to the board, it's good for the community to see us crossing swords a little bit, in these public meetings, right? Because that's what the community expects, that kind of diligent oversight. Yeah, good point. Thank you, Brian.
And then just make sure you're using the right numbers on the revenue limit sheet. The line 16, that's your total levy. That's not your Fund 10 levy. We've all made that and caught those mistakes in the past, but
What, you wait till now to mention that? Yes, use the right line. We probably should have opened with that. Well, this is why I always say next time it's going to be a really good edition. Next time on Money Talks, we're going to get it right. Well, the ability to double check, triple check your work like that is really dependent upon managing your calendar. This is not something you want to be rushing through at the last minute. I also, the roots of this association are that, we associate, right? Obviously. If you're new, calling up a trusted colleague or a veteran or a mentor and saying, can I do a screen share on my revenue limit with you? And I just need another set of eyes on it. Can you confirm that I've got this right? Is a great service. First of all, if you're a veteran, make yourself available to do that. And if you're a new person, don't hesitate to call somebody in your regional and take advantage of that kind of second or third set of eyes on your work. Right? This is when you don't want to. This is the one you want to get right. I always said this is the one issue every year that would make me. I'd be driving home and I would have to turn the car around and go back and double check something because I was nervous about getting it right. So
Andy, Pete, you have any words of wisdom?
Just try to get your board what they need, right? Like our board has a lot of questions and they don't want to be doing it necessarily on camera at the regular meetings. So we have a special meeting where they can ask those hard questions and we can kind of work through it a little bit more nuts and bolts, but it really depends on your district.
Yeah.
And the only thing I was going to add is something Mike had already said about reach out to a trusted colleague to double check your work. Even if you've been doing it for a while, it doesn't hurt to have a second set of eyes on here to do it because it isn't important. Like Mike was saying, this is the one that you really can't undo. So you want to make sure that you get this right the first time.
Yeah. I used to have these this fear of of seeing the local newspaper with my picture on it, and with it where it said local official screws up tax levy. That was kind of my deepest fear when I was a young business official. So, well, hey guys, this has been great. I really appreciate the time and the effort, especially Pete, your expertise and your willingness to share those spreadsheets with all your colleagues around the state. So thank you in particular, Brian, Andy. Always a pleasure to co-host these with you. So I think we're going to wrap it up here. Have a great weekend and enjoy this beautiful weather. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.